So we've discussed on this channel before how the deck building genre has exploded in recent years. And honestly, it can sometimes feel a little bit stale. While I always find it fun to play a quick game of Star Realms, how many games do I need with the exact same formula? You start with a mix of low-powered attacks and currency. You buy better cards from a market that turns over quickly as you buy. And then once you reach a tipping point, you start culling out your weaker cards, sort of concentrating the power of your deck, and especially getting rid of currency since you probably get to a point where you're not buying anymore. So Baseball Highlights 2045 does quite a few of these things. It has one innovation. It's the earliest game that I know of that did this specific thing. But it also has another thing going for it that makes a surprising amount of difference, at least to me. Welcome, board game soloists, to Top 5 Solo Games. I'm horror author and solo board game fanatic J. Allen Riker, and this is my review of Baseball Highlights 2045. The copy I'm playing there in the background is the spring training version, and for the soloist who doesn't need components for a third and fourth player, this is a great purchase. At the time of this recording, although maybe not at the time of this posting, I also think that there is a Kickstarter going on right now. Has nothing to do with that. It's not paid coverage. I'm not even sure that I knew that the Kickstarter was going to happen when I brought the game to my table and recorded footage. I just enjoy playing the game. So to play Baseball Highlights 2045 solo, you take the stack of the free agent cards. These are all better baseball players than you get in your starting deck. That's basically your market. And you draw 15 of them, and that is the AI's baseball team. So when you play a card for the AI, it's very simple and fast because it's random. And yet, because they start out with such a powerful roster of good players, even though they're not able to do the strategic planning that a human opponent would do, where if you play a good cyborg player, they're going to play their player that has a defensive move that cancels out any cyborg player. The AI does get lucky a lot just because their team is so stacked. You, on the other hand, have to recruit from the market, which is made up of of 6 free agents that you're able to recruit from. The difficulty of the game is set by the number of buy rounds that you give yourself, where you perform the same market action that you would in between games in the 7-round series, but you do them just at the beginning, one after the other, where you draw 6 of your players and you use the currency on those cards to recruit free agents by trading away lesser players. If you allow yourself 0 rounds to recruit from the free agent deck, from the free agent market, then it's actually supposed to be so difficult that in the rulebook it says the publisher wants you to contact them and say that you actually managed to win a series like that. And then on the other end, they say that 4 rounds of recruiting is where it starts to favor the human player, though you're still likely to lose the early games in the series. The game that you see going on behind us, somewhere, I don't know, is I did 3 buy rounds. So then when you're playing, because there's a buy round between every game in the 7 game series, at the beginning, you are probably going to want to recruit players who produce more currency, while later that won't matter, and you'll want to recruit bruisers even if they are unpopular with the crowd. Because that's kind of how it's justified in the game. Like you have, in order to liven up the game of baseball, there are human players, there are cyborg players, and there are robot players in the year 2045. And The thing about human players is that they have a real hard time competing with the robots and cyborgs, but they're fan favorites for their tenacity, and they also, I think, are good at fielding. But the main thing is they bring you quite a bit of currency. Whereas you can have some robots that are just batting machines, literally, and they will not be fan favorites. Humans like to see humans winning. So when you're done with your pre-series buy rounds, you draw 6 players, but this time, instead of using them to purchase free agents, you decide if you're going to set a pinch hitter, and then you go and play your first game. The games go super quickly. It feels even faster because each card first defends, then attacks, creating this back and forth that really makes for smooth play. At least as long as you don't get distracted and forget who's doing what, because that is the danger of this structure. I think it's definitely worth it though, because the game is so quick paced and exciting, and it might not be a problem for people who don't get easily distracted or have bad memories. So basically, as the perennial visitor, you go up to bat first and you threaten some number of runs at slow, average, or fast speeds, which impacts how many bases they can run after that initial hit. Then you draw a card for the AI opposition, seeing if they play something that will cancel out your hits. Like I said, despite the fact that their play is random, this happens more often than you'd think because their little deck is really loaded with abilities, and it happens at the most frustrating times. If you manage to get any hits through, you place your runners on their bases, and then you play someone who can hopefully defend against the runs threatened by the card that the AI just played as their defense. So you see their card first defended, and then it threatens runs. And then you play something with the hope of defending against whatever they're doing, and also bettering your position on the bases. So that just keeps going back and forth, on and on until the game, which is kind of a round, is won. You then take the 6 players that just played that game, and you use their purchasing power, which is listed on their card, to purchase free agents. As you always have to have 15 players on your team, you have to trade away however many players you recruit. And those trades can only be made from the actual players that just played that most recent game. So the game is simple and fast playing, but there are a lot of decisions to make as the play unfolds, especially because like you are trying to respond defensively, but that is also your next attack. And your attack, you may have base runners that you really want to further their position. So are you going to give up runs? There are like lots of small little intricate decisions to be made. But then there's also this randomness of flipping over the AI card that is really thrilling. Like it really, like you're like, okay, if they don't cancel out this home run, then I win the game. And it is really tense flipping that card over. One thing I like about this whole system is that because it's very easy to adjust the difficulty of the game in a simple way. You just buy a larger or smaller number of free agents at the start of the game. There's nothing else to keep track of. There's no complexity added whatsoever. It's all upfront. How many free agents do you allow yourself to purchase? And it makes a huge difference. So you can really fine tune the game to produce the challenge that you're looking for while still never being totally sure of what's going to happen. Yes, if you give yourself 7 buy rounds, you're going to win unless you just play astoundingly badly. But you might still lose a game in the series. So at the start of this video, I mentioned that deck builders these days usually have to do something different to get my attention. If it's the standard formula, then I feel like I've already got it covered. One thing that I really like about Baseball Highlights 2045, and I have seen it adopted by deck builders since then, but I think that this is the first that did it, is that you don't increase the size of your deck. You have to maintain a 15 card team. So you have to cull a card whenever you gain a card. This keeps the gameplay tight, and while it takes away that like kind of big decision in a game, in a standard deck building game where you decide when to start trying to get rid of cards, it instead turns that into a potentially difficult decision at the end of every single round. So like I said, if you purchase a free agent, you have to trade away one of the cards that you played with in that last game. Sometimes none of the 6 players do I particularly want to get rid of. Sometimes I'm left trying to decide whether a defensive ability or threatening a lot of runs is what I can spare with if I'm able to purchase a really good card but still have to then get rid of a good card. That decision can be impacted by the card that you're buying. You might be able to trade away kind of a lesser version of the card that you are getting. But also remember that the amount of currency comes into play, because if you're still early in your series, you're going to want to have players that generate enough income for you to buy really good players in the future. There are a lot of layers, despite the fact that the cards don't have that much on them. So another factor that you might take into account is who is on the opponent's team. Do you need to counter more cyborgs, robots, or humans? Each one of those is usually a separate defensive ability, whereas like somebody will be able to just cancel one hit. There are ones where you will be able to cancel all hits versus a robot or a cyborg. If they are really heavy on offense, do you need more defense? If they are really heavy on defense, are you going to want to try to snag a bunch of heavy hitters that threaten multiple runs so that when they cancel out a run, you still are making progress? But for me, just like in Dark Souls, where I don't try to memorize the order of the cards in the boss deck to learn the pattern, like which is supposed to make it more like a video game, but just I'm not gonna say it feels impossible to me. I could do it, but I don't think that it offers enough for the amount of mental strain and kind of unfun that that is for me. I also don't try to remember the AIs, like what's in the AI's deck. You're like seeing it one game, like 6 cards at a time. So like you're having to carry knowledge over between games, and it's not worth it to me. But maybe if it was, I would be able to play with fewer buy rounds. That option is there for you. I watched a video by Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and she discusses how she does use the early rounds to figure out what is in the AI deck that she's going to need to specifically deal with and recruit towards. So if you have a really good memory and find that sort of thing fun, that's another layer to add an extra bit of, I guess, complexity to every decision that you make. Beyond Solitaire is a great channel, by the way. It's one of my favorites, and you should really check it out, especially if you want to see war games discussed in an accessible way. She certainly is an experienced war gamer, but the way that she discusses them is really accessible, and I think that it may be her videos that got me interested in that genre of games. So there's another thing that I think makes this game feel fresh as a deck builder, even though it's a thing that doesn't always result in that, and that is the theme. It really does feel like playing simplified baseball, like sped up to the point that no one can find it boring. So besides the back and forth nature of the combat, where cards first defend and then attack, and so on and so on and so on, this game feels like a traditional deck builder, and yet it also completely feels like baseball. I think that that's really brilliant. It must have. I imagine that this started with a spark of like true inspiration, where the designer saw like the possibility, like imagined the possibility, and then it must have taken a lot of ingenuity to get it to work just right. You can get all sorts of deck builder like themes. Like there's a kind of a 80s kid nostalgia series of deck builders, GI Joe, Transformers, My Little Pony. For me, if those I haven't played any of these games. I do have GI Joe, the deck building game, and plan to give it a try. But if these games don't have a lot of differences, like the theme isn't enough to carry it for me. But the theme here, for me, really does make a difference because of how much it feels like a totally different sort of competition. It's not just warfare with a different face. It's not either sci-fi warfare with spaceships or fantasy warfare with individual soldiers. So there are expansions, which are very small decks of cards. I think it's usually 10 cards. This must be where they make their money because this game is less than $15 USD at Game Nerds on a daily basis. That's absolutely bonkers. This game has provided me so much more fun than that. I own also one expansion, but I haven't used it yet. Some of the expansions are solo friendly, some of them aren't. I'm still having fun with just the base game, and so I just haven't cracked it open yet. So, what might someone not like about Baseball Highlights 2045? Well, maybe having to say that really long name over and over again and hoping that you're saying it correctly. I've left highlights out a couple times and had to re-record it, just so you know. I'll call myself out. Maybe on the edit I'll just leave it in because of this call out. I don't know. Anyway, so one thing that someone might not like is the theme. If you are really set against baseball, that's the double-edged sword of a theme, right? I will say that even if you don't like baseball because you find it boring, that is not an issue here, and that you don't particularly need to understand baseball to understand the game. I think having a general idea certainly helps, but you don't need like a deep understanding by any stretch of the imagination because I don't have one. One thing that is less subjective is the rule book. I am not, I don't, um, I don't learn from rule books most of the time. And so I'm not really very hard on rule books compared to some people. Um, this rule book is extremely confusing with related information split far off. Like one example is that the nature of having slow, average, and fast runners is explained up very close to the front, and then the actual impact of those things, which is an extremely important core detail, is an aside several pages away from this in the discussion of, I believe, a gameplay example. Like, that's not good. I had, before I tabled the game this most recent time, I had played it a good few times. I shelved the game, and I just busted it out again. Got the urge to play it, and I couldn't flip through the rule book and remember how to play from it. I had to watch a video again because it's a pretty bad rule book. Um, I don't usually feel that my trouble learning from a rule book is the publisher's fault, but I should be able to refresh myself from a rule book, and this one is laid out in such a scattered manner that when I was looking to, I was like, oh, how does this work? Oh, how does this work? I was flipping around and um, couldn't find things. I don't think that you get a very good feel for the flow of the game, despite the fact that the game has a pretty large gameplay description in it. And I'll say it's a slightly unusual gameplay pattern, and so I think that no matter what, watching a video would help. The thing is that it's not that complicated of a game once you see it in action, and there are good videos out there. It's an older game, but I mean, it's got a video, like I said, by Liz Davidson um, over at Beyond Solitaire, and I think Colin at the One Stop Co-op Shop. So it's got the YouTube has you covered. So the question that you have to ask is this the sort of game that's worth a bit of trouble by kind of a subpar rulebook? I say absolutely. It's easy to learn from the videos. It is really fun and original, really affordable. Um, and except for the keywords, you're not going to have to refer to the rulebook very often. And the keywords are well defined in their own little section that I just leave spread open on the table. And also, my hope is that for the Kickstarter they revise the rulebook. I haven't looked into it because I feel like I've got my Baseball Highlights 2045 needs covered already. But they've got the opportunity there. So while I don't want, I feel like I needed to call out the rules. I hope that it doesn't put you off too much, because if everything else sounds good, I think that you're going to have a lot of fun with this game. So in summary, this is a fantastic, fast playing, thrilling game with great customization and a really strangely low price tag. It doesn't have a ton in the way of components, and I guess that explains it. But actually, it's got 2-player boards and a bunch of wooden pawns, and yeah, it should cost it should cost a lot more than it does. But beyond its price, I think that Baseball Highlights 2045 has earned its reputation as a true classic that's um, kind of always in conversation of best deck building games. And it has definitely earned a permanent spot in my collection. I can't imagine getting rid of it because it's just so much fast fun. I'm going to be pulling it off my shelf for a few days every year. So that's it from me. Um, do you know of any good baseball games with a solo mode? If so, leave a comment. I know of one that had a solo mode that I think was only available through Kickstarter, and so I haven't looked more deeply into it. Actually, I own it because I didn't realize that. It's a terrifically small box, so I still have it. But I wouldn't have bought it if I had known that I couldn't get a solo mode for it. Um, the thing about baseball games is that it's kind of an uncommon theme these days. I think that there was just a lot more interest in baseball in general in the past, and there were, I believe, quite a few baseball board games. They didn't have solo modes because solo modes just weren't common at that time. So I'd be really interested to know if there are any others to check out, even ones that just have really good fan-made solo modes, if such a thing exists. Anyway, have a great rest of your day and keep playing solo. So Baseball 2045, I think Baseball 2045